You have seen this thing in a museum. An iron cabinet shaped like a woman, lined with spikes. A little card beside it says medieval. The card is wrong. There is no evidence any such device existed before the 19th century. It was built for paying visitors, about 600 years too late. So here is the honest question. If you broke the law in a medieval English village, what actually happened to you? Start with what did not happen, because it is most of what you have been told. The Iron Maiden is a fabrication. Wolfgang Schild, a German legal historian, traced how they were made. Museum scraps, assembled into something spectacular, and sold as an attraction. The Nuremberg one probably began as a cloak of shame. That was a real punishment, and it was made of wood and tin. It had no spikes at all. It was designed to embarrass you. Somebody in the 1800s added the spikes and the legend. The chastity belt is the same story. Albrecht Classen went through the evidence and found a 19th century invention. The examples in museums were built long after the Middle Ages, they claim. There is a pattern here, and it is worth naming. The Victorians found the Middle Ages useful. A barbarous past makes the present look like progress, so they built one and charged admission. The real answer is duller and far stranger for being true. Most punishment was a fine, not a metaphor for a fine, an actual small payment of money. The court rolls call it an amercement. The word means you were in the mercy of the court. The court considered what you did and set a price. 6 pence for drawing blood in a fight, 2 pence for letting your pigs into the corn, 4 pence for brewing bad ale and selling it anyway, 3 pence for raising the alarm when there was no thief. Cursing the jury cost you, making a noise in court cost you. Almost every offense in the manor court ended in a payment, because the point was not to make you suffer. The point was to keep a village of 400 people working. You cannot plow a strip from a dungeon. There were almost no dungeons, because prison was barely a punishment yet. Jails existed to hold you until the court sat. Feeding a prisoner for a year was money the manor would rather have. Now, who decided?
Not a judge, not a lord in a fur collar. 12 tenants of the manor, elected. The men who farmed the strips either side of yours. They knew what you did, because they had watched you do it. They knew whether your ale had been thin for a year. They knew whose fence had been down since spring. This is not a jury of strangers weighing evidence. It is a village deciding what to do about a man it has known since he was born. That cuts both ways, and it cut hard. A stranger might have got a fair hearing. A man everyone had disliked for 20 years did not. The court rolls are full of the same names, again and again. The village had a view about you before you opened your mouth. There was no police force. There was you. Every man over 12 belonged to a group of about 10 households. The group stood surety for its own members. If one of you ran, the other 9 answered for him. Not with sympathy, with money. So when a theft happened, the village hunted its own thief. A cry went up, and everyone within earshot was legally obliged to join. Ignore it, and you were the one in court next week. This is why medieval villages could function with no state at all. The law was not something that arrived. It was something you were inside. And it made running away expensive for the people you left behind, which was rather the idea. When a fine was not enough, the next step was not pain. It was humiliation, in public, in front of people you would see tomorrow. The stocks held your ankles while you sat on the ground. The pillory held your head in your hands while you stood. Hours, not days. Usually on market day, because an empty square defeats the entire purpose. Everyone who bought your bread walked past you. Everyone you drank with saw you there. In a village of 400 people, that is the punishment. Your reputation was your credit, your marriage prospects, and your work. Losing it cost more than any fine the court could set. The scold's bridle and the ducking stool belong to a later century. Those are 16th and 17th century, not this. The offense that filled the courts was not violence. It was selling people short. The price and weight of bread and ale were fixed by statute. A baker who shaved an ounce off every loaf was stealing from everyone. Officials called ale tasters went round and drank the ale. That was a real appointed office, and someone had to hold it. Most brewing was done by women, at home, alongside everything else. Brewing badly was a fine. Brewing badly for years was a fine every year. Some households simply treated it as a license fee. But a baker caught deliberately cheating got the pillory, sometimes dragged through the streets on a hurdle first, with the short loaf hung round his neck so nobody had to ask why. The punishment explains itself. That is good design. There is a question nobody asks about all those fines. Where did the money go? It went to the lord of the manor, the same man whose court had just imposed it. The manor court was not only justice, it was income, a reliable annual return, written down and expected. That explains the brewers fined every year without ever stopping. It was not a failure of enforcement, it was the arrangement. You paid to brew. The court called it a fine. Everyone understood. Once you see the ledger, half the court rolls read differently. This was a system with an interest in you offending occasionally. Not badly, just regularly. The manor court was not the only one you could end up in. The church ran its own, and it judged different things entirely. Adultery, fornication, working on a Sunday, calling a woman a name in the street. Defamation was a spiritual offense, and people used that. Gossip could put your neighbor in front of a court. The punishment was penance, and penance was designed to be seen. A white sheet, bare legs, bare feet, a candle in your hands, and a walk around the church, or worse, around the marketplace. The marketplace was worse because the marketplace had an audience. The sheet was supposed to mean a return to purity. In practice, it meant everyone knew what you had been accused of. These courts have a nickname in the records, and it is not flattering. People called them the bawdy courts. And then there was a part of England where none of the usual rules applied. The royal forest was not a wood. It was a legal category. It could include fields, villages, and whole towns. Inside it, the king's deer were protected, and so were the trees they ate. The forest had its own officials and its own courts.
Under Henry II and his sons, killing a deer could cost you your eyes. Blinding and mutilation for an animal, for a man whose family was hungry in a wood he had lived beside all his life. Then in 1217, that was written out of the law. The Charter of the Forest said no man should lose life or limb for venison. A heavy fine, if you could pay, a year and a day in prison, if you could not. And if after that year nobody would stand surety for you, you left England. That is what reform looked like in this period, not mercy. A price list replacing a mutilation. But some cases had no witnesses at all. Nobody saw it, nobody would say, and still a decision had to be made. For those, early medieval England had the ordeal. You were asking God to answer a question people could not. In the ordeal of hot iron, you carried a heated bar 9 feet. Your hand was bound and sealed. 3 days later, the priest unwrapped it and looked. Clean, and you were innocent. Festering, and you were not. In the ordeal of cold water, you were lowered into a pond. Sinking meant the water had accepted you. That was innocence. Floating meant it had refused you. It sounds insane, and it is worth being careful about why. Everyone involved believed God would intervene, which means the guilty man knew he was about to be found out. Historians have noticed how often the accused confessed beforehand. The ordeal did not need to work. The ordeal had a cousin, and the Normans brought it over with them. If you accused a man of felony yourself, he could demand to fight you. Not a duel of honor, a legal procedure with a verdict at the end. The loser was not merely beaten, the loser had been judged. It was also used to settle who owned a piece of land. And in those cases, you did not have to fight at all. You hired a champion, and so did the other man. 2 professionals beating each other on behalf of 2 landowners. Whoever was still standing had proved his employer's title. It faded out long before anyone got round to abolishing it. In fact, nobody did abolish it until 1819, because in 1818, a defendant demanded it, and the court checked. The judges found the right was still there and said so. Their line was that they deliver the law as it is, not as they wish it to be.
Parliament repealed it the following year, slightly embarrassed. Then, in 1215, it stopped. The Fourth Lateran Council forbade priests to take any part in ordeals. That single ruling killed the practice. The ordeal was a secular procedure, but it needed a priest to bless it. Take the priest away, and it is a man holding a hot bar for no reason. So England had a problem. It had just lost the thing it used to settle its hardest cases. What it reached for instead was the jury. Not 12 neutral strangers, 12 local men who already knew. Their job at first was to report what the neighborhood believed. Only slowly did it become the job of weighing what was proved. The English jury did not begin as a protection. It began as a replacement for asking God. If it went badly, you had one move left, and it was extraordinary. Reach a parish church, and no officer could take you out of it. You had 40 days to decide what you were going to do. Stand trial and take whatever the court gave you, or confess everything and leave England for good. That second option had a procedure, and the procedure was exact. You called for the coroner, he came to the church. He wrote your confession down in front of witnesses. Then he named the port you would leave from. You swore to go straight there and never come back. They gave you a wooden cross to carry. It marked you as a man under oath, walking to the sea. Step off the road, and you were fair game. Men did this. The records have their names, their ports, and their crimes. They walked out of England and were never written about again. There was one more escape, and it was almost a joke. Clergy were tried by church courts, which did not hang people. So the question became how you proved you were clergy. The test was reading, in Latin, out loud, and the passage was almost always the same psalm. So it acquired a name. They called it the neck verse, because getting through it saved your neck, which meant any layman who memorized one psalm could pass. Everybody knew. It went on for centuries anyway. The literacy test survived until 1706. It was a hole in the system that the system had decided to keep, probably because everybody involved knew hanging was too much for most of it.
Refused to come to court at all, and something else happened. You were declared outside the law. Not outside the law's reach, outside its protection. You could be killed, and the killer had committed no crime. The old phrase for it translates as wolf's head. It meant exactly what it sounds like. This is where the Greenwood outlaw stories come from. The reality was less romantic than the ballads. Winter in a wood with no village behind you is a short sentence. None of this means the period was gentle. It was not. Felony meant hanging, and hanging was ordinary. Theft above a shilling could be a capital charge. Set that beside the fines and the pillory, and it does not balance. It was not meant to. A fine was for a neighbor who had gone wrong. Hanging was for someone the community had stopped counting as one of them. And there was one thing genuinely terrible, and it was procedural. If you refused to plead, the trial could not begin. So from 1275, they held you in the hard prison, starvation, until you spoke. By 1406, they had begun adding weights to your chest, more each day until you pleaded or you died. And men chose it deliberately, because conviction meant your goods were forfeit to the crown. No plea meant no conviction. No conviction meant your family kept the farm. Men were pressed to death so their children would inherit. That is the real horror of medieval justice. It is not a spiked cabinet. It is a man doing arithmetic. One last correction, and it is the one that surprises people most. Torture was not part of English common law. The common law courts rejected it and said why. It was cruel, it produced unreliable evidence, and it degraded the court. When it happened in England, it happened by royal warrant, outside the courts, over their objection, mostly under the Tudors. Parliament abolished the practice outright in 1640. So the torture chamber you are picturing is largely after the Middle Ages, or invented for a ticket booth 3 centuries later. So what would really have happened to you? Most likely, a few pennies in a bad month, an afternoon in the pillory on market day, 12 men you had known your whole life deciding what you were worth. The system was not built to hurt you. It was built to keep the village standing, which is exactly why it could be so hard on the people that decided to give up on. The spikes were Victorian. The arithmetic was real.